My name is Tochi Ojije, and I'll be talking about the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955. Important events leading up to the Montgomery bus boycott. Jim Crow laws were created. This legally separated black and white people in public areas. On buses, black people were forced to sit towards the back and give up their seats for white people if the front was fully occupied. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old black civil rights activist in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus. Her act of defiance led her arrest and ignited the Montgomery bus boycott, as well as the civil rights movement, led by Martin Luther King Jr. Although Rosa Parks' case was and still is extremely popular, there were others, like Claudette Colvin and Mary Louise Smith, who performed the same act and essentially helped build up towards the result of the bus boycott. Claudette Colvin was 15 years old when she refused to give up her seat. This happened 9 months before Rosa Parks. Mary Louise Smith also refused to give up her seat to a white passenger, and this resulted in a fine for civil disobedience. Connection to Mexican repatriation. This connects to the Mexican repatriation, in one way being both groups being targeted based on race and ethnicity, even if they were U.S. citizens. While African Americans were denied through segregation, Mexicans were forcefully deported or persuaded to leave. In both situations, race was used as an excuse to completely ignore citizenship. This showed that being a citizen did not protect people's rights, if society saw minority groups as outsiders or not fully American, seeing them as being unworthy of having equal protection. Why the Montgomery bus boycott is significant. The boycott was one of the first large collaborative acts of nonviolent resistance against racial segregation. This set the platform for other civil rights movements to occur. It also brought the African American community together, showing power in collective action in order to gain changes in the law, like when the court eventually ruled bus segregation unconstitutional because it violated the 14th Amendment in 1956. 75% of bus riders were black. When they instituted the boycott, the bus system's economy decreased significantly. It lost 65% of its income, which pushed the government to act on what people were fighting for. Lastly, the boycott propelled Dr. King and his nonviolent ideologies, putting him into national leadership. Long-term impacts on BIPOC communities. The Montgomery bus boycott inspired other marginalized groups to institute peaceful movements in order to stand up for their rights. It also showed that fighting through court systems could lead to positive outcomes. This powerful movement also showed BIPOC communities that they have power when it comes to economics, so instituting boycotts would create a massive negative impact on the economy, helping them gain attention. Lastly, it gave their marginalized groups hope for the future and inspired the younger generation to get involved and institute their own acts of nonviolent protest, like sit-ins and many more for long-term change. The Montgomery bus boycott was a year-long protest which proceeded after Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a bus. The boycott was led by civil rights activist Dr. Martin Luther King and the MIA, which stands for Montgomery Improvement Association. African Americans that lived in Montgomery, Alabama stopped riding city buses to protest for their disagreement in bus segregation. They used collaborative methods like carpooling and walking to achieve this movement. This movement fought through court cases like Browd v. Gale, which led to the Supreme Court case of bus segregation to be unconstitutional in 1956. The bus boycott was a turning point for civil rights. Connection to concepts from this course. I can connect it to the topic of race as a socially constructed idea. The system of bus segregation was based off of made-up ideas about race, not factual scientific evidence. Black people were treated like outsiders because of their skin color, not because of any actual biological differences. I can also connect it to ideological oppression. The belief that African Americans were less than others justified bus segregation. The boycott challenged these racist ideas. How power dynamics impacts teaching. The Montgomery bus boycott is usually taught by focusing on big names like MLK and Rosa Parks, but leaves out many key people. Marginalized voices like black women, working class people, and queer activists are often not included because of racism, sexism, classism, and homophobia. For example, Jo Ann Robinson helped start the bus boycott by printing 50,000 flyers overnight, but she's rarely mentioned. The story centers mostly on male leaders, while women organizers, poor workers, disabled people, and activists like Bayard Rustin, a queer activist, played major roles but are often ignored. Here are some pictures of some of the boycott participants, Bayard Rustin, and Jo Ann Robinson's flyers. The Montgomery bus boycott shows how important ethnic studies is because it helps us uncover what has been hidden and learn the full story. In history classes, we're mostly hearing about big names like Dr. King, but ethnic studies teaches us to look at everyday people who contributed towards that change. In The Historian as Corandera, it talks about how history should help heal by telling the truth and bringing forth voices that were left out. This presentation does as such. Learning from a non-Eurocentric point of view helped me understand that the boycott was about putting a foot down and standing up to a whole system that treated African Americans unfairly. It opened my eyes to realize that not one person could be able to do the job, but rather a whole community working together. Ethnic studies changed the way I think about history. Now I see how stories can be twisted or even left out on purpose. I learned how important it is to learn from different perspectives. It makes me think more critically about fairness, justice, and who gets to tell the story. Discussion question. Why do you think schools often leave out the names and work of women and community members when teaching about the boycott? Here are my sources. Thank you for listening.